Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started right now. Thanks for joining us for HDR and Panoramic Compositing. These are advanced photo techniques. My name is Katie, and I'll be your host and moderator for today, and our speaker is Stephen Burns. Stephen Burns is the president of the San Diego Photoshop Users Group and most recent instructor to the Light Photo workshops. He has discovered the same passion for the digital medium as he has for photography as an art form. His background began as a photographer 28 years ago and in time has progressed toward the digital medium. His artistic influences include the great abstractionists and the surrealists, including Jackson Pollock, Wassily Kandinsky, Pablo Picasso, Franz Kline, Mark Roscoe, Mark Tobey, and Leonore Feeney, to name a few. Stephen Burns has been a corporate instructor and lecturer in the application of digital art and design for the past 15 years. He has been exhibiting digital fine art internationally at galleries such as Durban Art Museum in South Africa, Citizens Gallery in Yokohama, Japan, and the Tijuana Cultural Center in the Museum of Mexico, to name a few. Part of his exhibiting won him first place in the prestigious Siebold International Digital Arts Contest. He teaches digital manipulation workshops in the San Diego area, and you will often see him as an instructor at SIGGRAPH. He has also written 7 books on Photoshop, focusing on trickery and FX, and also the art of poser. You can see the complete list of books and learn more about Stephen by visiting www.chromeillusion.com. And now what I'd like to do is let you know that there is a Q&A session following this presentation. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel at the bottom right corner of your screen. Also, this presentation is going to be recorded, so we will be sending out the recording either later this week or early next week. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Stephen. So Stephen, you're now live.
All right, thank you very much. And first of all, I want to make sure that everybody is seeing my screen. So remember the last time we had a little bit of problems with this. So if you're seeing it, I guess I'll hear it. I won't hear any complaining. So welcome everybody.
All right.
You can see it perfect. Excellent. That's what I like to hear. Stephen Burns, and thank you so much for joining this webinar and supporting the webinar. And I consider myself more of a digital artist, and I use actually quite a number of tools for the creation of my work. Now, before I'm just going to briefly share this with you, and then we're going to go right into the tutorial, so we don't really have a whole lot of time to talk about what I really would like to share with you. I have so much to share with you, and there's so little time. So chromeillusion.com is my website. You can go here to learn more about me. You can see and see a little bit more what I do as an artist, and I'll go through the galleries, explore that. Now, if you wanted to get an idea of the books that I've been involved with, my latest is the Photoshop CS5, Trickery and Effects, okay? And every chapter is a complete tutorial on how to create from beginning and end an artistic piece. So the way that I'm teaching this and the way I'm going to be teaching today is that you get an understanding of your digital tools, that you can start applying this intuitively. Now, one little thing I'm going to mention is that, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is that this hopefully will inspire some of you to consider the HDR workshop. If you go to the workshop section here, click on the Hight Dynamic Range Photography. The workshop starts actually this week, Thursday. It's a 5-week class in HDR where we get to go deeper into the exploration of HDR itself. So what are we talking, what is HDR here? I know this is a real big buzzword out in the world right now, especially the photography world. And what is this really all about? And what was HDR before the advent of digital? Now, currently, Hight Dynamic Range, obviously, we all know that's what it stands for, but why? Let's go back before the years of digital. How did we create an HDR image? If you had a 35mm piece of film and you print it on a 16 by 20, image, that's pretty much, the largest you can go without degrading the detail and the dynamic range, in other words, the range of tonal and visual information that you have on that digital negative, not digital negative, but the negative, traditional negative. So, so how did we get a higher dynamic range before the years of digital? We actually went to a bigger negative, a 2 1/4 inch by 2 1/4 inch, or by using a 4 by 5 or even an 8 by 10 size inch negative. So the larger the negative, the more information that our optics can record onto that. All right, so how does all this relate to the digital world? We're dealing with the sensor sizes now. So the sensor can only, capture so many megapixels, and is also limited to a particular dynamic range. So the whole idea is being able to capture within several different images shadows with details, midtones, and highlights with detail. I'm going to stress this often. We're dealing with this concept of shadows, midtones, and highlights. Now, this is a shot I took over at Death Valley Junction, and my Death Valley class is coming up on May 2nd through May 5th. It's a 3.5-day class, and it includes a Photoshop workshop with it. And most of my students are often going to be shooting HDR Panoramics. So what are we talking about here? First of all, the goal is to create an HDR image. Second is once we create the HDR image from each of our files or each of our frames, which will composite our panoramic, then we can go into Photoshop and start pulling those together and stitching them together. So what we're seeing here is one portion of a panoramic that we're going to create together. This is my normal exposure. Now, what you want is a very extreme dynamic range between your shadows and your highlights. The minimum that you want is a 2 stops over and 2 stops over, okay? But we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. This is one that's the normal shot. We go to, this is 2 stops underexposed to compensate for what? For our highlights, shadows, midtones, and highlights. That's what this whole game is all about as photographers, our art photographer. Here we are with the image that's 2 stops overexposed to compensate for what values. We're dealing with the lower tone values to make sure that we're gaining detail in these lower extremities of our files, wherever that may be. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about this, my particular process and my particular way of sharing this with students to understand not only the merging technique, but the HDR technique. All right, so this is what I've done. I've gone ahead and I've reduced these down to a little small. These are raw files. I highly recommend that you work with raw, but I've reduced these down into a folder called Reduce, it basically the same files, just so that I can work quicker and faster with you. Now, I have 3 images per set, or 3 images per frame, okay? So I have 1, 2, 3 for this particular frame. Another 3, again, they're all 2 stops under and 2 stops over. So I have, now what you can do also, if it helps you, is select the 3, hit Command G in Bridge, and that'll merge them together. Like the next group, and Command G for group. Go ahead and select the next one, Command G, then you get all of your groups together, and it'll help you to keep organized inside of Bridge. Okay, so I have a total of 4 groups. I need to merge all these together. The program I'm going to focus on today is Photomatix, okay? So I have them reduced here. Now, how did I reduce them very quickly? I'm going to just quickly show you this, and then we're going to get right into Photomatix. Now, under the Death Valley Junction, here are my 3 files. What I normally do is I select them all, and if you so choose to merge them out as a TIFF file, you can also consider using the lens correction in Photoshop to do that. So I select all of the images for my HDR, hit the return key on my keyboard. This is going to open it up into HDR, all right? Select all of these files right over here. What you want to make sure that you're not making any type of tonal adjustments to your images. You primarily want to focus on your sharpening area and your noise reduction area, also your lens correction area. So what I've done is I applied lens correction to all of these. When I selected the Canon, it automatically saw my lens. It's an EF100 2.0 Canon lens. It automatically corrected the distortion, automatically corrected any of the chromatic aberration. Okay? So if I start to move a little closer here. So we look at the edges. If you don't see chromatic aberration with the red or green or the yellow and blue being offset here. So once that's done, I'm going to synchronize all of these settings to make sure they all have the exact same settings. Click OK, and what I did was I saved them out into a folder and called the Depth Valley Junction Reduced. Okay, so you can save it out as 16-bit. You can save it out as an 8-bit, and actually your 16-bit and 8-bit settings will be right down here in the bottom. Let's go ahead and just pull this up so it's easier to see. Click this here. You can set up your 8-bit or 16-bit, and I decided to reduce it down to smaller file sizes to a 2.8 megapixel, primarily for your purposes, be able to work a little faster. Now I've already done so. Let's go cancel out of here, go back to Bridge, go to my reduced file folders. Now we're already there. We had them in groups. Now let's go in here and go into Photomatix and begin to understand how to start shifting these tones. One of the things that photographers are forgetting about, especially the newer photographers, digital photographers in particular, is the importance of values, tonal information. Okay, so what am I talking about here? Let's go into Photomatix. Photomatix is open. Photomatix is this wonderful program that does only one thing, is it merges tonal values together to massage your high dynamic range values into a shorter range of values that your monitor can see and your printer can print. All right, so what? Let's go to our load bracketed images. Let's go get them. Browse, and I'm in the reduced folder. I'm going to select these three, and I'm going to click open for now. Now I'm going to, it shows me here that I have them selected. I click OK, and here I can go ahead and align them, which I always keep checked. I can reduce the noise if I like, and reduce chromatic aberrations. I've already reduced chromatic aberrations in Photoshop, so I'm not going to worry about that so much. So go ahead and click OK, and it's going to start to merge these together. What it's going to show you is an intermediary HDR image which has such an extreme range of values that your monitor cannot even display this information. All right. Now, just for your, just for your own purposes, if you go to your view menu, we can view this as an 8-bit histogram showing our red, green, and blue values where they reside in an 8-bit environment, or I can also choose to show go to my view menu, the HDR histogram, okay, with giving you from your 0 to your extreme exposures and where they're falling on a logarithmic histogram. All right, so if we have time, we'll talk about this a little bit later. But let's go in here and actually start to tone map this information. So what we're seeing here is a range of information your monitor can't display and your printer can't print. So we need to massage these values. I'm going to keep using that word massage or displace values to a range that we as artists feel our final image needs to look like, utilizing this extreme range. So right over here, I'm going to click on Tone Map. Now, even back before the days of digital, we started working with 4x5 and 8x10 images or negatives. I discovered that, you know what, this is incredible, beautiful tones and values that I'm seeing in this stuff. But so what? What matters is what you do with these values and tones. Now, we need to understand what's going on here in Photomatix, especially with these settings. Now, I have one that this is actually applying a default setting that I've used previously. And I'll show those to you in just a little bit. But for now, I want to go ahead and click the Enhancer Default, which is going to be a default when you first load on Photomatix. This is what you're going to see, Enhancer Default. Now, we have several different settings. Automatically, we're going to have our presets here. Now, I don't want to, go over every little bit of what all these presets are doing, because I'm assuming that some of you guys are already fairly familiar with Photomatix. I want to get into my philosophy of manipulating these tones, how I think as a photographic artist. And I'm going to go back to the enhancer default. Let's take a look at what enhancer default gives you. By default, you have a strength of about 70. I'm going to explain this. I want to make sure that you guys understand what these sliders are doing and why. Not just, these are some settings you should use because some photographers discovered something and you're following them. All right, you need to understand what's going on here and why and what this whole Hight Dynamic Range is all about. So what this has done is it massaged your values, all that extreme 32 bits of information. By default, we're working in 8-bit in Photoshop. Now, that's 256 shades of gray. Now, 16-bit, as we all know, is about 65,000. Your 32-bit is going to be, 2 to the power of 32. Okay, that's your HDR. All right, as opposed to 2 to the power of 8 for 8-bit or 2 to the power of 16 for 16-bit. All right, so already it has started to apply your tones so that you have detail in your shadow information, your mid-tone information, right in here, some of these areas in here, as well as your highlights. Now, your strength, let's take a look at the strength here. But before we do anything, let's take the color completely out. And this is how I like to work with my students, is actually no color in creating your HDR image. And we'll start by going to your color settings. Now look at your settings over here. Most of these are going to represent tonal values, all right? I have a color settings here, which I've cascaded up. I want to close up. I don't want you to look at it for right now. And then I have one other color setting in here, which is for color saturation, which I'm going to pull out to complete 0, all right? And what's going to happen is we're going to look at a black and white information. Now, just for our, what I want you to do is actually remember, I'm going to click on Enhance Default once again, and keep in mind where your color saturation slider is. It's number 46. Your strength is number 70, and we're going to explain what those are doing in a little bit. Now, let's go ahead and just pull this out to 0 on the color saturation, and what we're looking at is a black and white image. Now, let's start working with these values here. In Photomatix, we have this extreme range of values. Remember, we have 2 stops under, or to compensate for our highlights. We have an image with darker values, 2 stops over, image with more of our highlight values, but also compensating for our shadow details. And then we have our medium range information, which is right, exposed right dab in the middle on proper exposure. So let's take a look at the strength here. What is this really doing? Let's pull the strength all the way to the left. Now, what it's doing is simply this. We have shadows, midtones, and highlights. That's the way HDR works. That's how Photoshop works. That's how Photomatix works. They have all 3 of those programs have that in common. So I want to, what's happening when you bring the strength to 0 is it's compensating, and not compensating, but it's basically allowing you to apply your midtone to higher values only. So what it's doing is it's taking out completely well, not completely, but mostly your lower tone values. So your image is going to exist mostly of these mid-tone to higher tonality values. All right, let's bring it up a little more. So we want to add a little more black. We want to take that lower tone file, the one that's 2 stops darker, and start adding a little more black to these images. And I'm going to bring it up about 1/4 of the way, and let's watch what happens. See? All right, so we're starting to gain more contrast. We're maintaining our highlights because by default, we're applying highlights and midtones, so they're not going to move. However, if we want to start introducing the shadow, what's happening is the dark information is coming in and starting to richen up the lower tonal values. So now your highlights are becoming more specular, and your shadow information is starting to become a lot more rich. Now, I want this to look like a rich, texturous image here. So let's pull in a little more and see what happens. Up to about 77%. All right, now the way that I like to work is I want the whole pie. I want the whole cake. Pull it all in there. Go to 100%, and that way I have 100% of all of my 3 images working for me. Now this is starting to look grungy and texturous, and that's what I like. That's what I want to work with. Now, if I double-click here, I'll get a little loop that comes up that gives me a little upfront, a closer detailed look. This loop is not accurate to what you're actually going to get when you actually process this image. Remember, this is like working in a raw file, so nothing's been processed yet. We're working in RAM. So this is not accurate to what we're seeing here, and it's not going to be accurate to what we process. So I don't always like to use it. I primarily use it just to make sure everything is aligned correctly so that there's no blurry edges or chromatic aberrations, and to make sure I have good texture detail. I already know I have that, so I'm not going to worry about it at this point. Go ahead and turn it off. All right. Pull this on over and click that. And all right, so now what I'd like to do is let's talk about luminosity. Shadows, midtones, and highlights. Luminosity is going to affect your shadows, midtones, and highlights equally. All right, so we're going to bring it up, and you can see that everything is going to get brighter. All right, now if I want to go back to, if I go back the other way, the luminosity value is going to richen up my tone in here. All right, so let's go ahead and put that back to 0. Hit enter. It's going to be right back down in the middle. Micro contrast is exactly what it implies. It's minute contrast adjustments. In other words, it's dealing with the shadows and the highlights, leaving the midtones alone, technically, right? So if I increase the contrast, I should get deeper, richer shadows and much brighter highlights. Go ahead and pull this on over and release it. There, okay? So I'm getting deeper shadows and brighter highlights. All right, so again, my idea is I want this to look like a fairly, grungy, texturous, black and white image. So I'm going to go just a little bit of ways up here. I'm not going to go too far on this just yet. And I think what I like to do is go down and address the white point and black point. I'm going to come back to smoothing. This is important. I'll come back to this. So my white, it's going to deal with your highlights. White point, bring it up. It's going to start using the highlight value in those, out of those 3 images that we merged together, and start to applying and letting the highlights dominate. Okay? I just accidentally clicked on that. I'm going to just pull this on over and turn this off again. All right? So if I bring the highlights back, I don't want my whites blown out. I want to be careful with my highlights there, because most of my contrast magic, what I'm going to do in Photoshop. I want to use Photomatix to make sure I get a nice tone image, a nice texturous image, getting it fairly close to a pleasing black and white image, but it's not an image manipulating program like Photoshop. It's here to tone map that 32 bits of information into something that's more palatable in Photoshop. Okay, so black, important, shadows, midtones, and highlights. Photo printing 101, a nice black with detail, rich black with detail. All right, pull the black slider over and see what we get. Oh, yeah, I'm getting a richer black now. All right, so by getting a richer black, just as we were in a dark room, adding a little more black to it also means it's affecting some of your midtones. All right, now before I do anything else, I'm going to add a little more black to it, just to richen up a little more. There we have a little richer image. Now, our midtone is our gamma. Shadows, highlights, midtone. Shadows, highlights, midtone. So if I bring the gamma up, there we go. We're pulling out some detail now. The midtones are getting brighter. My blacks are nice and rich. They're staying there. And then we will go ahead and adjust the gamma to taste. Now, once we've done that, let's go ahead and apply this smoothing concept. And then we're going to actually create a custom profile or a custom preset for this. So let's go over here to, right over here to the color settings. Let's take a look at what's in here. I can do my saturation and highlight separately. I'm not going to deal with that just yet. Let's look at this smoothing here. In fact, let's go to the smoothing right up in here. Let's see what it does. There's a whole concept of massaging all of these tones. Pull it on over to the left, and look at what's happening. As halos are happening. This is compensating for more of the highlight expanding out toward the shadows. it looks like oil and water, separating your highlights and your subtle shadow information so that they're sitting apart from one another. And if I bring the smoothing over, it's almost like mixing oil and water or like smudging charcoal. All right, so we're taking the charcoal, we're smudging it out so it becomes a much better blend, and that's what that's doing, okay? So hopefully this is making a little bit sense as to what we're doing. We're dealing with these tones first, and then let's come down to micro smoothing. I'm going to pull this on over. Watch what it does to the texture here. It's making minute smoothing adjustments within the texturous area. All right, so I'm going to pull it on over, and we're on. Oops, I accidentally pushed the gamma, didn't I? So let's go ahead and hit the undo, Command Z, and or I'll go ahead and just pull this on back to here. That'll be a lot easier. All right, so there we go. Now that gamma is giving us the mid-tone that I like. Micro smoothing has been applied. I'll apply it a little bit more. It'll give me a nice smoothing adjustment. Highlight smooth, let's watch what that does. So what we're doing is we're taking the highlights, we're smoothing those out, and you can see it's a little bit better in the sky. Starting to blend the sky a lot better. Let's see what the shadow smoothing does. Pull that on over separately. So shadows, midtones, and highlights. Shadows isn't doing too much. We have it nice and rich already. So I'm going to keep it right about there. All right, one last thing I think I'm going to do is add a little bit of micro contrast. Give it a little more snap. There we go. All right, that's looking a lot better. Now, what I want you to see is why I pulled the color contrast out, or the color saturation out completely to begin with. Remember, it was about 46 in the color saturation. Let's pull it up about a quarter of a way and take a look. This is the time we pull in our color. All right, so that's looking pretty good already. I'm going to pull it up just a little bit more. That's at 21%. Let's go to about 29. And it's already getting a nice saturation. So I don't have to go that far up with saturation anymore. By default, it was like 46. I'm at 32, and this is already taking on a nice saturated look. So this is nice. I'm happy with this. I'm going to take saturation just a teeny bit more, maybe to 35, and see what it looks like. Okay, we'll go with that one. All right. So I'm getting a message that audio is gone, but I'm assuming you guys are hearing me jumping in and out. Hopefully most of you guys can hear me here. So there's my image. So what I'm doing is I'm utilizing HDR to give me a natural tone mapped image. Not something that looks very filtery, where a lot of your midtones are completely washed out. Now what do I do from here? I can save this. Go to the preset, come down to the bottom, save that preset. Now let's save this one as Death Valley Junction, and I'm going to call this one Final. So number 4, we're going to call it Final, and save it. All right, so what can we do from here? We want to create a whole system, a whole bunch of those stitched images as HDR. So I'm going to get out of Photomatix, out of this image from Photomatix. I'm going to go to the batch bracketed photos. And look at what I have here. I'm going to apply that setting, that preset, to all of these images inside of the reduced folder, and I'm going to put it into another folder called, let's call it Tone Maps 2 file. So I'm going to go into Death Valley Junction, go back into the root of the folder, right-click, make a new folder, and I'm going to call this one Tone Maps Final. And then let's go into Photomatix.